My name is Michael Rogers. I'm an operative with a special unit under the U.S. Department of Defense. Normally, our team handles a range of missions, from counter-terrorism operations to extracting high-value witnesses from hot zones. But this time, the order was different. We were instructed to head into a remote mountainous region in Colorado, where a classified research facility was tucked away in the wilderness. It all happened quickly and unexpectedly. We were stationed at a military base near Denver, running routine drills and waiting for our next mission, when a liaison officer entered the barracks. He informed us that communication with a secret laboratory located high in the mountains had been abruptly lost for unknown reasons. According to what little information we were given, the lab belonged to a government entity, its identity classified even to us, and was conducting research on a unique biological material recently brought in from overseas. The officer explained that the last transmissions from the scientists had been fragmented but alarming. They mentioned a highly dangerous discovery and unusual, indescribable phenomena. Then all channels went silent. Attempts to re-establish contact with the facility via digital military networks and backup radio lines were met with nothing but static. The Pentagon decided that immediate action was necessary. A specialized team, us, was to be dispatched to assess the situation. The orders were brief. Conduct reconnaissance, report on conditions, and if there's a threat, contain it. The scariest part was the lack of clear details about what exactly those scientists had been working on. All we had were the facility's coordinates and basic instructions on its layout, approximate locations of entrances, an overview of the building, and the note that it was equipped with a robust security system, including sealed metal airlocks and armed guards. The whole thing felt deeply mysterious. I'd had my share of unusual missions during my career, sometimes involving classified projects. But the briefing on the missing scientists made my skin crawl. There were mentions of ancient ritualistic artifacts and rumors that the military had gotten involved in something far more significant than technological experiments. None of this was officially confirmed, of course, but we all knew we were taking on a serious risk. We were given 1 hour to prepare. Quickly, we geared up with full combat kits, checked our weapons, donned body armor and helmets, and packed medical supplies, night vision devices, and other survival gear suitable for the mountainous terrain. There were 6 of us. A small team, but command assured us it was sufficient for reconnaissance and potential evacuation. Within the hour, we boarded a Black Hawk helicopter which immediately lifted off. The lights of Denver faded behind us, and soon the dark silhouettes of the mountains began to take shape on the horizon. The sky was growing darker by the minute, clouds thickened, and gusts of wind made the helicopter shudder. Our conversations during the flight were brief and to the point. Captain Marshall, our team leader, studied the map and received final instructions over a secure channel. I sat by the window watching as the mountains loomed closer, their slopes densely covered with pine forests. This part of Colorado is known not only for its breathtaking views, but also for unpredictable weather, treacherous ridges, and narrow ravines. Finally, the pilot announced over the intercom that we were approaching the drop zone. The helicopter began its descent, and through the faint glow of the spotlight, I could see a narrow strip of flat ground, a makeshift landing site under a high-voltage power line. The lab was about 2 miles from the landing point, deeper into the forest at the base of a steep slope. As we secured our positions, I checked my watch. We were instructed to maintain contact with the base every 15 minutes. However, we were warned that the rugged terrain and local anomalies, known to disrupt signals in the area, could cause interference. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't just technical issues, but part of a much larger, darker secret. We landed on a grassy, mud-covered clearing under the pale light of the moon. The wind howled through the towering pines and spruces, which loomed like dark, ancient columns. It was immediately clear that the facility was deeply isolated from civilization. If something went wrong here, no one outside would know for a long time. Our task was to make our way through the forest. The night vision goggles helped us navigate the trees and rocks, but occasionally we had to use tactical flashlights, especially when we encountered thick underbrush. Moving in single file, we maintained absolute silence. No one knew what might be waiting for us. After about half an hour, we reached a barbed wire fence topped with razor wire. According to the map, this marked the facility's outer perimeter. In configurations like this, security is usually extremely tight, but we saw no patrols, no spotlights, not even the sound of guard dogs. Strange. "Look at this," one of my teammates whispered, pointing toward the gate. The gate was wide open. A heavy chain, meant to keep it secured, lay broken on the ground as if it had been forcibly ripped apart. I crouched to inspect it, looking for signs of an explosion, but there were none. The chain hadn't been blown apart. It had been pulled until the metal snapped. We stepped inside. The courtyard was surrounded by dark utility buildings, and the main entrance to the research facility was located in the southern wing, which resembled a bunker made of concrete and steel. Normally, the entrance would have massive doors, a security checkpoint, and surveillance cameras. Before approaching, we carefully moved along the outer wall, trying to assess the situation. Silence. Not a single light was visible, not even emergency lighting. We checked a small outbuilding to the side, which appeared to be a guard station. Inside, everything was in disarray. Overturned desks, shattered glass, and bloodstains on the floor, now dark and partially dried. There wasn't a single living soul. No one responded to the noise we made, nor did anyone call out to us. "Take a look at this," the captain said, shining his flashlight on one of the walls. Deep gouges were visible, several jagged scratches, each about 6 to 8 inches long, as though something massive and clawed had raked across the concrete. I might have dismissed them as marks from shrapnel or a metal tool, but the scratches had an unnervingly organic appearance, as if made by some kind of animal. We exchanged uneasy glances in silence. Seeing this, a heavy unease began to settle in my gut. I'd witnessed plenty of horrors in my career, but this scene felt different, like it belonged to a story beyond anything we'd encountered. Leaving the guard post, we moved toward the main entrance of the lab. The metal door was wide open, though it appeared warped, as if something had smashed it from the inside. Hinges and bolts were torn out, and the thick steel was bent. It didn't make any sense. "We're going in," the captain ordered. Weapons at the ready, we cautiously stepped into the vestibule. If anyone had been inside, guards or surviving scientists, they would have heard us. But we were greeted only by dead silence, occasionally broken by the faint crackle of damaged lights. The air was heavy with an acrid mix of chemicals, stale dampness, and something far more sinister. Perhaps the sickly stench of decay. We found ourselves in a long corridor with sterile white walls, the kind common to medical and research facilities. Fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows. The floor was littered with shards of glass and scattered papers. Shining my flashlight ahead, I came across a large crimson stain on the ground. It was still wet, meaning whatever had happened here was recent. As we moved further, we encountered a body, a man in a white lab coat. He was lying on his back, eyes frozen in a wide stare of terror, his chest torn open by something monstrous. Blood had pooled beneath him, splattering the walls. I crouched to check for a pulse. Of course, there was none. Judging by the body's temperature, he'd been dead for only a few hours. A wave of nausea rose in my stomach, and I barely managed to suppress it. The scene was truly grotesque. My teammates grimly continued the search. We'd seen horrors before, but this was different. In combat, you usually know who the enemy is and why shots are being fired. Here, in a high-tech facility, something had butchered these scientists. And it didn't seem like gunfire, but rather something primal. Further down the corridor, we found more bodies, soldiers in uniform. One had multiple stab wounds, likely from shards of glass or metal, while another bore deep, ragged gashes, eerily reminiscent of claw marks. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. "All right, team," the captain said quietly. "We're moving to the central block, where the server room and primary lab sector are located. We need to figure out what happened here and see if there are any survivors." Radio communication was plagued by constant interference. Every attempt to contact the base resulted in nothing but static. Whether it was the reinforced concrete and equipment causing signal disruption or deliberate jamming, we couldn't tell. One thing was clear: staying here too long wasn't safe. But leaving without understanding what happened wasn't an option either. The corridors led us to a spacious hall with a row of elevators and doors branching into various departments. Large glass panes dividing the spaces were partially shattered, their surfaces spider-webbed with cracks. Around us lay overturned chairs, broken tables, and monitors with smashed screens. Where there should have been pristine cleanliness and high-tech order, there was chaos and a suffocating silence. We split into two groups. 4 of us, including me, headed toward the section with research labs and staff quarters, while the other 2 moved toward the server room to try to establish emergency communication. As we walked down the corridor, I noticed blood trails leading in multiple directions. Some walls bore the imprint of bloody handprints, smeared as if in panicked desperation, while others had long streaks as though a body had been dragged. The sporadic flicker of overhead lights only added to the macabre atmosphere. The stench of death hung heavily in the air. We came across a door labeled Senior Researcher's Office. Unlike other doors, which were either locked or broken open, this one was ajar. No sound came from inside. "Cover me, I'm going in," I told my teammates. Pushing the door open cautiously, I found what might have once been a typical office. Now a scene of disorder. A chair was toppled, a desk lamp lay on its side, and the contents of a cabinet had spilled across the floor. Blood-stained papers were scattered everywhere. But the most striking thing was the faint glow of a computer monitor at the back of the room. It seemed operational, even though the rest of the facility appeared to be without power. This workstation must have had its own backup power source or battery. I approached the desk carefully, stepping over papers and debris. There was less blood here than in the corridors, but it was still evident that some violence had taken place. Perhaps the office's occupant had managed to escape or been dragged out. The monitor displayed a desktop interface. Icons cluttered the screen and a couple of text documents were open. A folder titled Artifact Uruguay caught my eye, along with others labeled Surveillance Footage and Experiment Logs. According to protocol, we were to collect any data that could shed light on the events here. "Michael, find something?" one of my teammates called quietly. "Looks like reports. This could hold critical information," I replied, focusing on the files. The system displayed alerts indicating it was running on emergency power, which could fail at any moment. I managed to open one document titled Journal Senior Researcher Dr. Caldwell. Scanning the first lines, I realized it was an informal diary kept by the lead scientist overseeing the project. I read aloud so my team could follow along. The entries were dated within the past few weeks. Entry 1. Our research subject has finally arrived in Colorado. It's an incredibly ancient artifact, officially documented as a discovery from Uruguay, unearthed in a coal mine deep underground. Its estimated age exceeds 100,000 years, contradicting everything we know about human history. The artifact resembles an elongated cocoon, covered in strange symbols and patterns. Some look like prehistoric cave art or runes, while others appear organic, almost biological. There's no clear analog for this in any archaeological record. Our U.S. government partners negotiated its acquisition from Uruguay under strict secrecy. The lab's mission is to study its nature, determine what lies inside, and assess potential applications. There's already suspicion that it contains biological material, though we cannot yet confirm if it's alive. Strange, I muttered. So they brought this thing here from Uruguay and kept it hidden. I continued reading. Entry 2. Today, we observed the artifact up close for the first time. It does resemble a large capsule, just over a meter in length, about half a meter in diameter, and weighing approximately 50 kilograms by our measurements. Its surface is hard but not stone-like, more akin to chitin or some dense alloy of unknown composition. Upon arrival, it was placed in a diagnostics chamber for initial analysis: X-ray, ultrasound, and magnetic resonance imaging. To our surprise, most of our equipment returned inconclusive results. The artifact seems to block or distort signals. X-rays barely penetrate, and ultrasound readings are chaotic. The material appears to have shielding properties. There's a palpable tension in the lab. The military personnel who escorted the artifact are unusually on edge. It's clear they know more than they're telling us. I've been instructed to maintain absolute confidentiality, even among other departments. Everything here is classified at the highest level. The journal's entries grew increasingly ominous as I skimmed through them, each revelation more chilling than the last. I continued reading aloud, my voice steady despite the dread that gnawed at the edges of my composure. Entry 3. Last night, the on-duty guard swore he heard a low, almost infrasonic hum coming from the artifact. No one believed him, chalking it up to nerves. But this morning, 2 more staff members claimed to hear some sort of rustling, or even a faint muttering. We reviewed the surveillance footage. Nothing unusual apart from mild electromagnetic interference near the containment box. This could be explained by a magnetic field emitted by the artifact. However, it's unsettling how many people are now complaining of headaches and disturbing dreams. To be honest, I've started having nightmares too. I dreamt of a massive creature, wolf-like but standing upright on 2 legs with burning yellow eyes. I can't tell if it's related to the artifact or if my nervous system is simply overwhelmed. But the feeling is deeply unsettling. I paused, a cold shiver running through me. The mention of a bipedal, wolf-like figure sounded eerily similar to ancient legends of werewolves. But this was a laboratory, a place of science, not folklore. Entry 4. We've tried opening the artifact's shell using a mechanical cutter, diamond drills, and even a high-frequency laser. All methods failed. The material resists everything. At best, we left faint scratches, which bizarrely seemed to heal and vanish over time. It's physically inexplicable. The tension is mounting. If there's a living organism or even a preserved one inside, it's our responsibility to determine its nature. The military is demanding results, and the lab's leadership sends daily inquiries. We're stuck in a deadlock. It's as though this is a black box shrouded in mystery. I flipped forward, and the next entry sent a jolt of unease through me. Entry 5. Last night, something extraordinary happened. A lab technician accidentally cut his finger, and a drop of blood fell onto the artifact's surface. Instantly, the cocoon began to vibrate and emit a low-frequency sound that made my ears ring. It lasted only 2 or 3 seconds before stopping. We were stunned. Immediately, we hypothesized that some biological material, blood specifically, might act as a trigger for the artifact. When we intentionally added more blood, the shell began to open, slowly and faintly, like a flower unfurling. The military personnel were ecstatic. They demanded an immediate experiment to fully open the artifact using blood. Don't ask whose. Safety concerns were relegated to secondary importance, much to my growing unease. Who knows what might emerge from this thing? I exhaled deeply, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. So this was how the artifact was opened. It explained much of the horror we'd encountered so far. Entry 6. The experiment was conducted. We designed a system to drip-feed blood onto the artifact. Over the course of an hour, the cocoon's shell bloomed open. Inside, we discovered a mummified creature. A grotesque hybrid of human and wolf. It was curled in a fetal position, its body covered in short, dense gray fur. Its elongated head featured a protruding wolf-like jaw with razor-sharp teeth. Its limbs were human-like but elongated with tapered fingers ending in pointed claws. The entire team was horrified. This creature matches nothing known to modern science. Genetic analysis revealed an anomalous DNA structure, a blend of human, wolf, and something unidentifiable. If these findings are accurate, we're looking at either a groundbreaking biological discovery or a catastrophe. I stopped to catch my breath, the weight of the information settling heavily on my shoulders. The descriptions sounded like something out of a nightmare. But when I thought about the claw marks in the corridors and the mutilated bodies we'd seen, it was all too plausible. Entry 7. We began studying the mummy. Its tissue wasn't completely desiccated, more like preserved. When exposed to certain stimuli, a few drops of blood, the application of heat, there were faint muscular responses. It seemed as though this creature could be reanimated. Staff members have started reporting nightmares. Terrifying visions of the wolf-like figure roaming the lab's halls. The facility psychologist dismissed it as collective paranoia. But I have a sinking feeling we've awakened something that should have remained dormant. The military is thrilled, calling this a potential leap forward in what they term the biotechnology program. I suspect they're referring to genetic weaponization. But if that's the case, I fear the consequences. We have no idea what we're dealing with. I couldn't shake the image of the mangled gate and the claw marks we'd seen earlier. It seemed undeniable now. This creature had come back to life and escaped into the world. Entry 8. During today's experiment, the creature's corpse, or mummy, showed unmistakable signs of life. Weak activity in various muscle groups, a barely perceptible pulse beneath the skin, and a faint flicker in its eye sockets. We also recorded a rise in body temperature. It's literally coming to life before our eyes. This phenomenon is accompanied by a disturbing effect on the staff. People are sleeping poorly and becoming irritable. Nearly everyone is experiencing similar nightmares. A massive wolf with glowing eyes chasing them through labyrinthine corridors. We've requested that the project be halted, but higher-ups have flatly refused. The orders are clear. Unlock the creature's full potential, even if extreme measures are necessary. A military security detail, armed to the teeth, is supposed to ensure our safety. but I'm not convinced they're prepared for what might happen if this thing fully awakens. The next and final entry was brief, but it sent chills down my spine. Entry 9. The experiment has entered a critical phase. The creature is now actively responding to blood, absorbing it at a cellular level and regenerating its tissues. It appears to possess remarkable healing abilities. At night, we've observed unexplained movement within its containment chamber, and the surveillance footage shows frequent static interference. For the past 48 hours, none of us have slept. We're monitoring every change, but I can't shake the feeling that the creature is aware of us. It feels as though it's watching even through closed eyes, reaching into our minds to awaken a primal fear our ancestors must have known when facing predators in the dark. I'm afraid we're on the verge of witnessing its awakening. And if that happens, we have no idea how to stop it. The journal ended there. I swallowed hard, trying to process what I'd just read. It all made horrifying sense. The scientists had unearthed some ancient form of life, perhaps the progenitor of werewolf legends or something entirely unknown. By experimenting with it, feeding it blood, they had stirred an ancient evil. God, someone behind me muttered, their voice trembling. There are video files here, I pointed out, motioning toward another folder titled Surveillance Footage. We opened it and found several files. One was labeled Last Session Camera Lab. I clicked to play. The grainy footage showed a containment chamber with glass partitions. Inside, the platform held the creature in a semi-reclined position. Its gaunt, wolf-like body was covered in patches of gray fur, its elongated jaws and clawed limbs making it look more like a nightmare than anything natural. Restraints bound its limbs and electrodes were attached to its body for monitoring. Several staff members in white lab coats moved in and out of the frame, flanked by 2 armed soldiers in camouflage. Judging by the timestamp, this footage was recorded late at night. One scientist approached the creature with a syringe, possibly intending to extract or inject something. Suddenly, the creature twitched, its body jerking violently for a split second. A guttural, low growl filled the room, raw and primal. Even through the poor audio, it sent a chill through me. The soldiers tensed, one drawing his sidearm. The creature opened its eyes. Even through the pixelated image, I could see the faint, menacing glow of reddish-yellow light. Then, with a surge of unimaginable strength, it strained against its restraints, the leather straps groaning under the pressure. The scientist panicked, one rushing to a console, likely to activate tranquilizers or containment protocols. It was too late. The creature tore free, its claws slashing through the restraints as though they were paper. It rose, lunging toward the glass barrier. The first strike cracked the reinforced glass. The second shattered it. Shards flew as the monster leapt into the room, snarling viciously. The soldiers opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the room as bullets riddled the creature, but it didn't falter. It moved with inhuman speed, slashing one soldier across the chest and hurling him into the wall. Blood splattered everywhere as chaos erupted. The remaining staff screamed, scattering in all directions. The creature pursued them relentlessly, its claws slicing through flesh with horrifying precision. One scientist collapsed, screaming in terror as the creature pounced. Blood sprayed across the lens, momentarily obscuring the view. When the camera refocused, the creature was standing over its prey, its muzzle slick with gore. It turned, staring directly into the camera. For a moment, it was as if those glowing eyes were looking through the screen, piercing into our very souls. Then the image distorted with static, and the recording cut out. I stopped the playback, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was silent, the weight of what we'd seen pressing down on all of us. "That thing," one of my teammates muttered, his face pale. "It got out. That's why we found the bodies, the blood, everything." "And it's still out there," I added grimly. "Either hiding somewhere in the complex or it's escaped into the wilderness." We regrouped in the main hall, where the team that had checked the server room reported that the lab's communication systems were completely destroyed. There was no way to contact the outside world from within the complex. "We need to get out of here and report to command," the captain said. "Let's hope our helicopter is still where we left it." The question of the creature's whereabouts remained unresolved. We decided to sweep the main corridors, searching for any signs of its presence. If the monster was still in the building, we risked a direct encounter. As we moved through the hallways, all we found were mangled bodies, blood-smeared walls, and the wreckage of a once high-tech facility. Doors to lab blocks had been torn open, and in one room we saw a steel cage ripped apart. It seemed the creature had been recaptured at some point but escaped again with brutal efficiency. Some areas were flooded with water or chemical solutions from broken pipes. Deep scratches marred the walls, and long drag marks gouged into the floor hinted at violent struggles. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of leaking water, the rustle of wind through shattered windows, and the sound of our own breathing. When we reached the main gates, we saw they were damaged and ajar. Claw marks and bloodstains on the metal told the story. Someone or something had forced its way out. Now we knew how it had escaped. Outside, a cold wind greeted us, rustling the trees. I swept my flashlight across the yard and saw that the outer fence was partially destroyed. Where there had once been a sturdy wire mesh, there was now a gaping hole surrounded by bent and twisted steel. The edges looked as if they had been ripped apart by sheer force. It was clear the creature had broken free during the night of the massacre. It had likely vanished into the vast forest surrounding the lab, or perhaps gone further into the mountains. We couldn't be sure. But the thought of such an ancient horror roaming freely under the open sky sent a chill through all of us. We hurried to the helicopter's landing site. Thankfully, the pilot was still in contact via shortwave radio, nervously scanning the dense pine forest around him. When we boarded, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Leaving that cursed facility behind felt like waking from a nightmare. Still, a grim realization lingered. A catastrophe had unfolded in that lab, leaving no survivors. I couldn't shake the memory of the surveillance footage, the creature's glowing eyes staring straight into the camera. As the helicopter rose above the dark forest, I gazed out the window. Below, a sea of pines stretched endlessly, their peaks shining faintly under the moonlight. Somewhere down there had the monster survived? Most likely, yes. We had no idea what would happen next. Could it survive in the wilderness? Would it attack unwitting hikers or campers? Would it retreat further into the mountains? We reported to command that the facility's personnel had been completely wiped out and that the research subject had, likely, been destroyed. In truth, we didn't know if it was dead. What we did say was honest. The lab has been destroyed. There are no signs of survivors. The creature likely left the facility. A recovery operation is needed. High Command ordered us to return to base immediately to file detailed reports. Additional units were dispatched to the area. Helicopters and ground patrols combed the region for miles but found nothing. All the data was classified and sent to Pentagon labs. I was personally instructed never to disclose any of it. Even if I remain silent, the truth remains unchanged. An ancient werewolf, or whatever we choose to call that creature, now roams somewhere in Colorado. Perhaps it has moved into neighboring states. Perhaps it succumbed to hunger or the bullets of the search teams. Though from what we saw in the video, regular rounds seemed ineffective. Or perhaps it's hiding, waiting for its moment to strike. Story 2. My name is Jamie Caldwell. A year ago, I had no job, no plans for the future, just endless debts and a sense of hopelessness. I drifted through the streets of Los Angeles, picking up odd jobs here and there, but everything was falling apart. One particularly bleak day, a man in a pristine U.S. Navy uniform approached me at a bus stop. His name was Lieutenant Stanford. He had an air of confidence, a dazzling Hollywood smile, and an impeccably pressed uniform. He said he could offer me an easy path to stability, food, shelter, and even the chance to see the world. All I had to do was sign a contract with the Navy. I hesitated, but Lieutenant Stanford was incredibly persuasive. He promised me access to educational programs and a profession once my service was over. All on the government's dime. It sounded like a ticket to a new life. Even though a little voice in the back of my head warned me it might be too good to be true, I had no other options, no job, no support. So I went for it. I signed the papers, received my orders, and within a week, I was on my way to San Diego for boot camp. I thought the Navy would be a relatively peaceful place, but instead I found myself not on a ship but at a shore base in San Diego. There, I joined a group of about 100 other lucky ones who were being run ragged. We were shoved around, screamed at, and subjected to endless drills. Our senior drill instructor was Sergeant Braxton Bull Harmon, a massive man with eyes that seemed to pierce your soul. Every time he opened his mouth, it was like thunder rolling through the air. It felt like his sole mission was to break us down and forge us into soulless machines. We ran, we did push-ups, we marched, we studied the code of conduct, but those easy moments Lieutenant Stanford promised were nowhere to be found. Still, I clung to the hope that eventually things would settle down and I'd be assigned to an aircraft carrier or some other familiar role. But shortly after completing basic training, things took an unexpected turn. When assignment day came, I was summoned to a small office on the base. Behind a desk sat a wiry officer with a stony expression. The nameplate on his desk read Lieutenant Grant. He flipped through a stack of papers, studying me like I was a lab specimen. "Private Caldwell," he said dryly. "Congratulations on completing boot camp. We've got a special assignment for you. You're being sent to Blackwood. Sign this non-disclosure agreement." "Blackwood?" I repeated. I thought I'd be assigned to a ship. "This is a direct order," Lieutenant Grant snapped. "Sign it." I scribbled my name on a stack of papers stamped "Top Secret." They explained that I'd be tasked with a simple job, guarding a facility in the Utah desert. Just standard military duty, they said. Moments later, I was practically shoved out of the office. That evening, I boarded a military transport plane. The flight lasted several hours. Once we landed, I was loaded into a jeep and driven down a dusty road for what felt like forever. Even by desert standards, the place was desolate. No homes, no gas stations, just scorched earth and the occasional tumbleweed. Finally, a series of tall fences topped with razor wire and sniper towers appeared in the distance. The first sight of Blackwood sent a chill down my spine. Massive walls, multiple layers of metal fencing, automated turrets. It looked like they were either trying to keep something from breaking out or prevent something from breaking in. The road led to a tunnel, and we descended into it on an elevator creaking under its steel cables. Inside, the place was a maze of narrow corridors, steel bulkheads and endless doors secured with keypad locks. Harsh, fluorescent lights illuminated every inch of the facility. As I followed my escort deeper inside, a gnawing tension grew in my gut. Why had they sent me here? What secrets did this hidden bunker in the middle of Utah hold? After a few twists and turns, we entered a spacious room where a stocky man with a thick black beard stood by a table. His name tag read Staff Sergeant Vega. He looked at me like I was some sort of cosmic mistake. "Caldwell? The new guy?" he grunted. "Yes, Sergeant." "You're under my command now. How the hell did you end up here?" "I got assigned, Sergeant." "Fine. Listen up, follow me, and don't talk much or look around too hard. There are things here you're better off not seeing." I trailed after Vega, my insides turning cold. If a seasoned sergeant like him seemed wary, what on earth or beneath it was going on in this place? The sergeant led me down an elevator to the lowest level of the complex. Below ground, the atmosphere grew even more ominous. Thick, airtight doors, signs reading "No entry without clearance," and surveillance cameras at every turn. We were told it was strictly forbidden to ask questions about the nature of the research or discuss anything we might see. The slightest leak to anyone outside would result in a court-martial. We stopped in front of a massive door labeled Containment Alpha 9. It looked like the vault of a high-security bank, a giant circular hatch with levers and multiple electronic locks. "This is your post," Vega said. 12-hour shifts on your feet, 12 off. You'll be paired with another guard, Rick Simmons, who's been here for a year. Sit tight. Make sure no one tries to open this door. And don't even think about opening it yourself," he added with a warning glare. "Unless you're keen on spending the rest of your life behind bars." He smirked, but there was tension in his eyes, as if he knew something horrifying lurked beyond that door. I could only nod. My partner, Aviator Rick Simmons, turned out to be a friendly guy. Tall, cheerful, but with a noticeable nervous energy. His eyes had a peculiar gleam, like someone either perpetually sleep-deprived or living under constant stress. "Did they tell you what this place is about?" he asked one evening as we stood our watch. "No, just that we're supposed to guard this door." "Consider yourself lucky," Rick muttered with a bitter smile. "I've been living in a nightmare for a year." By my second week, I began to understand what he meant. Strange vibrations sometimes emanated from behind the Alpha 9 door, low, rumbling sounds that made my ears feel pressurized. Occasionally, there were faint thuds or rustling noises, as though something alive was moving back there. But no one gave us any official explanation, and asking questions was not an option. One night, through the background hum of the ventilation system, I could have sworn I heard a scream, or maybe a moan, or something that resembled both. I glanced at Simmons and saw that he had gone pale. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Shut up," he hissed, his face tight with fear. "Pretend you didn't. Asking questions gets you court-martialed." We were about 6 hours into our shift when a loud bang followed by a splashing noise echoed from behind the heavy door. Then came a feral, guttural howl blending into an eerie scraping sound. A wave of terror coursed through me. My heart was racing uncontrollably. Rick clutched his head and began muttering incoherently, It's calling me. It's calling." He kept repeating, his voice feverish. His eyes rolled back in his head, and suddenly, blood started trickling from his ears. He collapsed to the ground, convulsing violently. Panicking, I grabbed my radio. "We need a medic! Now!" I shouted into it. All I got back was static. Rick writhed as though in agony, nonsensical words spilling from his mouth in a guttural, alien tone. Sounds I'd never heard from a human before. I tried to help him, but then he opened his eyes and stared at me with a deranged grin. I recoiled, feeling the weight of some otherworldly presence. Before I could react further, Rick lurched to his feet, unsteady but determined, and staggered toward the access panel by the door. He had his own set of keys and the security code. Both of us did, as required for the post. I lunged at him, trying to stop him. "Rick, what are you doing?" I shouted, but he didn't seem to hear me, his eyes vacant and glassy as if in a trance. He swiped his access card and began entering the code. The terminal beeped and the locks on the door started clicking open. I grabbed his shoulder, yanking him back, but he spun around and in one swift motion plunged a knife into his own throat. Warm blood sprayed across my hands as he gasped and crumpled to the floor. His lifeless eyes stared past me. Why did you do that?" I whispered in horror, staring at my dead partner. And then with a chilling hiss, the massive door began to open. Dim, reddish emergency lights illuminated the space beyond, and the first thought that shot through my mind was, "I have to seal it shut." But I was too late. From the dark corridor beyond the door, shrouded in swirling clouds of dust or vapor, it emerged. It looked as though its flesh had rotted away, hanging in gray, decayed shreds, with tentacles slithering out of its limbs, writhing in a sticky, wet glide. Its eyes were irregular in shape, unnaturally large, emitting a cold, greenish light that seemed to burn through my mind. When it saw me, the creature stopped for a moment and tilted its head. I realized it understood exactly who it was looking at. Suddenly, a crushing, searing pain filled my head, as though something was trying to force its way into my skull, clawing at my brain from the inside. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. I wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound. All I could feel was the scraping inside my mind, like a needle dragging across bone. The creature took another step forward, studying me as though I were a curious toy. Waves of unbearable psychic pressure crashed over me, and blood started dripping from my nose. I knew that if I didn't stand up and run, I'd either go insane or die right there. The elevator to the surface was at the end of the corridor. I staggered to my feet, clutching my head, and sprinted with every ounce of strength I had. Behind me, I could hear the wet, squelching sounds of the creature's steps. At the same time, I felt a silent touch pressing against my mind, probing, trying to break my will. When I reached the elevator, the doors suddenly slid open, and Sergeant Vega stepped out, his face twisted in horror. It was clear he'd realized something had gone terribly wrong. "Caldwell, what the hell is... Oh my God!" He started, but before he could finish, the creature emerged around the corner. Its glowing eyes flared unnaturally, and Vega froze, paralyzed. I watched as his body convulsed, blood pouring from his eyes, ears, and nostrils. He tried to scream, but his throat seized up, reducing the sound to a strangled gurgle. His body writhed unnaturally, bones cracking as they bent at impossible angles. He didn't even need to be physically touched. The creature's mere presence was enough to kill him in the most agonizing way imaginable. In sheer desperation, I slammed the elevator's emergency close button. The creature lunged forward, but the doors slid shut just in time. I heard its claws scrape against the metal as the elevator began its ascent. The psychic pressure in my head suddenly lifted, and I collapsed onto the floor, trembling uncontrollably. At the top level of the complex, chaos reigned, alarms blaring, warning lights flashing. Over the intercom, frantic voices shouted about a containment breach. I knew I had only one option: escape. In the hangar, I spotted a parked truck. Smashing the window with my rifle's butt, I climbed in, fumbling for the keys. Miraculously, they were still in the ignition, probably abandoned in the panic. I started the engine and sped toward the perimeter, crashing through the security gate. Gunshots echoed behind me as the guards tried to stop me, but I kept driving, racing down the dusty road away from Blackwood. A few miles out, I stumbled upon a tiny airstrip, likely used for supply deliveries. There was a small plane sitting on the tarmac. Leaping from the truck, I sprinted toward the pilot, who looked utterly bewildered. Brandishing my rifle, I shouted, "Take off, now!" Terror flashed in his eyes, but he obeyed. The plane lifted off the runway, and through the window, I saw the gray walls of the Blackwood base receding into the distance. In the back of my mind, though, I still felt the faint, unnatural touch of the creature's presence, like it hadn't entirely let go. As the plane climbed higher, the gravity of my situation sank in. I wasn't just fleeing the base. I was deserting the military. To the government, I was now a traitor and a murderer. Tuning into the plane's radio, I heard, "Attention all units. Private Caldwell wanted. Armed and dangerous. Mentally unstable. Casualties include Simmons, Vega." They're pinning it all on me. It's easier to make me the scapegoat than admit they lost control of something unspeakable in Containment Alpha 9. Now I'm a fugitive, constantly on the run. But even more terrifying than the military's pursuit is the thought of that thing still loose in Blackwood. Can they contain it again? I doubt it. They'll try to lock it down, quarantine the area, or concoct some lie to cover it up. Since that day, I've been hiding. I can't stay in one place for long, afraid the military will find me and silence me for good. But what scares me even more is the thought that the creature might escape into the world. Wherever I go, the nightmares follow. I see its gray, rotting flesh and those predatory, glowing eyes. In my sleep, I hear the same scraping in my head, like it's still searching for me, trying to invade my mind from afar. I'm terrified that one day I'll wake up to find it standing by my bed, or not wake up at all. But I have to warn anyone who reads this. If you ever feel that scratching in your mind, that unexplainable pressure and headache, if you dream of dark corridors and hear echoes behind closed doors, run. Please, run. You might have stumbled upon what the military is hiding underground. It's alive, it's intelligent, and it doesn't stop. My name is James Caldwell, former private of the U.S. Navy, now branded a traitor to my country. And this is all I can tell you about the monster from Containment Alpha 9. I only hope my story spares someone else the same fate, because the evil we unleashed is no longer sleeping. And if you feel it, it might already be too late.